Morning.
Morning.
Welcome everyone. You're in the hall and outside and attending through the computer. I just want to say a few words before we undergo the practice this morning of KUYO, of making offerings to all the people who have died due to the coronavirus. Over 2.5 million over the past year, 500,000 in the United States. Last week in my talk, I was asking this question about how do we grieve? How do we not turn away from what is deeply difficult? That is something that is necessary. And oftentimes we get so focused in trying to deal with problems, to take care of things, to get them back on the right track, which is all good things to do. I'm very glad that we're getting vaccinations, for example. But as we cling to those kinds of solutions, there can be a tendency to forget about paying attention to this difficult part that is not changeable. We can't reverse those 2.5 million deaths. So what do we do? How do we face it? Within Buddhism, there is an ancient, very simple, very straightforward practice of making offerings. In Japanese, it's called KUYO. It's written with Chinese characters. I don't know how to pronounce it in Chinese. In Sanskrit or in South Asian languages, clusters of languages in India, is oftentimes referred to as puja. And the Chinese characters simply mean offering nourishment. And this is a very simple practice. I hesitate even to call it a practice, because when we use the word practice, it sounds as if like we're doing something to create a result. So maybe a word like enactment would be better. More like prayer than like exercising. Okay? And so this KUYO or puja is something I think humans just know how to do. So we have a word for it, but we often forget to do it. It consists of identifying first something that you want to offer nourishment to. So we're doing this kind of KUYO all the time at the temple when we're offering incense and tea and food and flowers and candles to the image of the Buddha and to the ancestors and to the Bodhisattvas. At home you may do some of that kind of practice. You may have an altar where there's some kind of image of something, a Buddha, Bodhisattva, perhaps a saint. Many people are fond of having a rock or some kind of special piece of the natural world which reminds them of something. That's the first step in this practice of offering nourishment, is identifying. So in this case today, we're identifying all the people who have died by the coronavirus. And here on the altar, there's a piece of wood in which I've inscribed that in ink. And some of you at home may have created a paper tablet. We sent out some directions about how you could do that. The second thing in KUYO is simply to make offerings. And so there are the 5 types of offerings that are the typical offerings. Like I had said earlier, there's light, incense, flowers, food, and drink. So those are considered to be the 5 types of offerings. If any of you have practiced in the Vajrayana tradition, Tibetan Vajrayana tradition, they usually have many more. They'll have like conch shells, which are music. They have wonderful sculptures that are made out of colored ghee, and they make lotus flowers out of them and those kinds of things. Sometimes we see those in Japanese Buddhism too, but within our school, typically those five that I pointed out are the basic ones. And then there are the offerings of sutras. And there's the sutras, we chant sutras, we chant teachings from Buddhas and ancestors. Those sutras are both an offering of speech, but they're also an offering of heart. It's not just the sounds that we're making, but it is the sounds we're making and the heart with which we come to the offering, which is expressed through the various chants that we do. It's one of the ways. Our body is prostrating, bringing together the five offerings, and then with our speech, we're offering sutras. Sometimes there's a offering of the incense words will happen today, or if there's a leader of the ceremony where they'll read a poem or they'll make a kind of proclamation. But that's also all happening with our hearts. Even if you can't have a really strong chanting voice or something, you bring your heart to the offering through the sound. So identify, we make offerings, and then we dedicate the merit. So in Buddhism, merit just means anything we do which is pointed towards awakening, right, is said to have merit. And we don't keep that merit for ourselves. We dedicate it to other beings. And so in the offering, there's both the nourishment that we give to whoever it is that we're calling out, or whatever spirit is that we're calling out. We give that nourishment of the offerings, but then we also offer the merit that is generated through the practice to them, and then usually to all beings in some way. So that's KUYO. Now, depending on what tradition you're in, there's different ways of doing it, right? You might have your Honda version and your Toyota version and your Ford version and your Chevrolet version, or whatever it is. We have the Soto Zen Buddhist version as translated through Buddha-ai Temple's way of doing our ceremony. So that's what we'll practice this morning. But I want to encourage you to not be too stuck in that. This is something you can do very simply. Right before the Buddha's awakening, one of the very key things that happened in his life that led to his awakening was receiving offerings from Sujata, a woman who lived in a village nearby where he was practicing. And she thought he was a tree spirit. And she had become pregnant with a child, which she was unable to do for a long time. And she had been praying to this tree spirit. And after she became pregnant, she brought this offering out, and there was the Buddha sitting under the tree where she would make her offerings. And she made this offering to the Buddha, a very special offering, which was led to his awakening. So the reason I'm saying that is you might make offerings to trees. You may make offerings to waterfalls. You may make offerings in your car, or in your house. It can really be anywhere. We do it a certain way here at the temple because we have that kind of tradition. But if you just think of the simplicity of this practice, identifying, making offerings, and then dedicating the merit, you can do it in a very straightforward and simple way yourself. Particularly when we think about making offerings to people who have died. There's a really great, very important medicine in this. We have a tendency to divide life and death, to hold them as opposite things, really to hold them in opposition. And as we're holding them in opposition, our tendency is to turn towards the things that we can hold on to. And we cling to those things, the things that we can see, the things that we still can work with, because we don't want to see the loss. So the having and not having, we hold in opposition, and we cling tightly to what it is that we can hold. And as we do that, a poverty of heart starts to settle in, because we can't admit this other side. And there's a tendency for a lot of frantic solutioning. I don't think that's a word exactly, but solutions become the currency of our heart and mind. How are we going to fix it? 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 Because there's something that we cannot fix. And since we won't admit it, we go into kind of hyperdrive around fixing. And you may be experiencing some of that now. You know, and again, it's wonderful as we get solutions to concrete problems, but it's only part of the story, right? The solutions to concrete problems. And we invest in that and things become frantic, we become very unsettled. So when we're making offerings in relationship to loss, to death, it's something about remembering a connection between birth and death, between life and death. That there's a wholeness there, that they don't have to be held in opposition. That there's deep compassion in meeting these two things. And there's a wisdom there. There's a wisdom in the absence. There's a wisdom in the loss. There's a wisdom in the difficulty that loss presents to us. So we make offerings to remember, to bring something together, or to realize that something is together that we spend a lot of energy in keeping apart. We attend to this gateway of birth and death. It's the same gateway from which beings emerge and beings return. That one gateway we attend. When we hold it in opposition, we can't. The gateway disappears. But as we stand on the side of life and we make offerings into a world that we can't see, the gateway appears because it's not being held apart. After the earthquake in Japan, which, by the way, the 10th anniversary is coming up this Thursday, the 11th of March. I still remember that. That's where my wife's family is from, and my teacher's temple is right there in the middle of all of that. And so we had just moved out of the temple about a year before that. We were living across the street. And I remember we were in our bedroom, had just gone to sleep. It was maybe 11 o'clock or something like that. And our oldest daughter, Anzu, ran into the room and she said, Mom, Dad, there's this huge tsunami happening in Sendai. And we could see it on the screen, you know, like there was live footage of the water just going over these places that we've been many times. And we didn't know if it was going to get all the way to where Azusa's parents live. It came within a couple kilometers of where Azusa grew up. And so one of her aunts was in the area where the tsunami hit, but she was able to get out, and we found that out very quickly. And my teacher was safe, and his temple was safe, although a big part of the temple fell down in the earthquake part. All the gravestones were toppled and everything. Anyway, it was quite a thing. I think at the end, all put together was about 20,000 people died in that short period. And there's a couple of things in relationship to that, and it was one of the first times in my life that I met some kind of real calamity. You know, even though I didn't have people that I was directly related to who had died, there's all the stories of loss. And some of you may have heard about this. There's a radio program. I'd encourage you to go listen to it. I think it might have been an episode of This American Life, but it might have been a different program. I'm not sure. If you Google it, I'm sure you could find it. But there was a man who took a telephone booth, this old classic style telephone booth, and he lives out by the ocean, outside of a small town, and he just put this telephone booth in his yard. It's not connected to anything. Well, maybe connected to everything. And he said, this is a place you can talk with those you've lost. And people have come from all over Japan, through northern Japan, people lost. And they come to this telephone and they speak with those they've lost. And he has a recorder inside of that telephone and records some of these things. And in this telephone, or in this radio program, you can hear some of that. When I listened to that program, it reminded me how thankful I am for having met this very simple recognition that death is not far away. It's just right. It's right here. And the people who are speaking on that telephone, they're just speaking very directly. And they say the same thing over and over again. They say, we're okay. We'll be fine. Mom's doing good. So-and-so graduated. This and that happened. And it reminded me of, living in Japan for a long time in my wife's grandparents' grave and with her ancestors for many generations there. That's what we do. We go and we light incense. And then, the sadness has mostly gone away. It takes years, for someone to pass to the difficulty of it. So it's not that it's always super emotional, but you're just there and you say, oh, I entered first grade. Or, wow, we had the really good miso stew that you always made. We were still eating that, and we made some the other night, and it was really tasty, Like, that's just how it is. You go to the grave and you just communicate. You just speak, very directly. And so my kids all grew up like that, going to see a great-grandma, great-grandfather, just going to the grave. I'm so thankful for that. This is something that making offerings opens for you. You don't have to have that telephone booth, although that's great. Sometimes we need something. We need some kind of container to teach us how to do it. But that's what KUYO is about, being able to make offerings, being able to speak, very directly. And our life is taken care of by doing that. Very mysterious, actually. I watched a program a couple months ago. I think Dokyu turned me on to it. What's that called?
Unsolved Mysteries.
Unsolved Mysteries. Yeah. Anyone watched Unsolved Mysteries? There's one about northern Japan and a priest that lives right by the coast in Miyagi Prefecture, Shiogama. Is it Shiogama? I can't remember now. Anyway, it's right there. There's like Sendai, that's where my teacher's temple is, where my wife is from, and you just go right out to the ocean, and there's this town right there, and he has a temple there, and there's a story about a young woman who was being visited by many spirits, and in the way, and he was trying to help her through that. And in part of the show, he says this really beautiful thing. He says, for us, and he's talking about, you could say he's talking about Japanese people. I would say he's talking about Buddhist people. He says, for us, death is not so far away. When someone dies, it's like a paper screen opens, and they go into the next room, and then the paper screen closes. We can't see them the way that we saw them when they were here with us in this world, but we can see their shadow on the screen. And we know they're just right there. So we can speak with them. We can have a life which continues to interact with them. I thought that way of putting it was really nice. There is something, we can't see as people who have died in the same way. We never will be able to in this life. But that doesn't mean they're totally gone. And I don't mean that to say they're just a memory in our head, but to say that there is something alive and true. They died. That's not the same thing as being dead. So, in KUYO, we are enacting the truth of that through making offerings. And I'd like to encourage you, we're going to do this ritual today together, and then I'd encourage you to keep it going, particularly in relationship to people who have died from coronavirus. Maybe once a week, you could offer incense. We here at the temple every day we do we make offerings and read that into the dedications, dedicating to the people who have died from coronavirus. We also do a special ceremony every day to help overcome the difficulty of coronavirus, people struggling with coronavirus, which is all of us as well. So I encourage you to keep something going, turn back to it. You can make one of these little simple tablets like that we sent out with the digest. It's also those instructions are posted on the website. And it doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, it's better if it's not complicated. It should be just something which can call you back to this recognition of a world that is not divided, but is connected, very directly. You could keep that going for some time, till we're out of the woods, whenever that will be. A very traditional time is to do that for 49 days. So maybe once a week for 7 weeks, or every day for 7 weeks. But people are continuing to die. So at least here at the temple, I don't think we'll be giving that up anytime soon. During the ritual today, I'll leave once here in just a moment and change my robe, and then enter, make incense offerings and prostrations all together, and then there's a way to empower a ihai is the name of this tablet that's up here, and so I'll do a kind of empowering of the ihai, which is calling together the spirits that are called out on the ihai. And then after I finish doing that, then everyone in the assembly can come forward and make an offering of chip incense. It's in this box. On one side there'll be charcoals, and the other side there's some chip incense. This is chips of sandalwood. So you just take a little pinch, and you can touch it to your forehead, and then you drop it onto the charcoal, and then stay there for a couple moments, and then you let the next person come through. So each person can come and meet very directly, pay your respects to the spirits. And then after that's finished, then there will be some sutra recitation. One of the recitations is called the Verse of the Lifespan, and we have some books that have that on it. Did we have the papers? We have papers of that. Did you see?
We have some. We do have enough books.
We have enough books. Okay, great. So the Verse of the Lifespan, and then that comes from the Lotus Sutra, and then the next thing we'll chant is the Daiishin Dharani, which is the great compassionate heart Dharani, and then the merit will be dedicated after that. So identify, or making offerings of all the 5 things, as well as sutras of the voice and of the heart, and then we dedicate the merit. On this day, March 7th, 2021, the Fourfold Assembly gathers to make offerings for and to all those who have died due to the coronavirus. Our hearts are heavy with loss, And we ask you, spirits, to receive the merit of these offerings, that your lives be perfumed with the fragrance of Buddhas and ancestors, that you guide us through the present difficulty and fill the world with compassion and wisdom. Like the path of a bird or water flowing through earth, living and dying directly, leaving no trace, a gate flung open. Spirits fill the hall. Our teachers are at hand.
Please be seated.
Praise the Tathagata, the Arhat of great wisdom, completely clear action, the well-gone world renouncing one, the unsurpassed, fully mastered teacher of gods and humans, the world honored one.
So entirely the Dharma realm, appearing everywhere before all living beings. According with karmic conditions and responding to every appeal, it never fails to reach them, such that even ordinary places are the seed of awakening. We humbly beg the three treasures for their attentive concern. Having chanted the verse of the lifespan chapter of the wondrous Dharma Lotus Flower Sutra and the great compassionate heart Dharani, we dedicate the merit to the pure spirits of all who have died due to the coronavirus. We also dedicate the merit to all beings in the 3 worlds and 6 realms, and especially to Jack Mathis, Evelyn Leedy, Adriano Lorenzo, Faith Bybee, Miroko Hirata, Gary Gruel, Sam Barrett, Judy Wood, Betty Jo Hudson Stanley, Chick Corea, Barbara Gladstein, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, James Robert Hutchinson, Tim Grimes. May they be serene through the transition we call death. We also dedicate this merit to Ralph and the Kayamba family, Coral Mac, the Gladstein family, Carleson, Mary Lou Cavendish, and Alicia Taylor, Andrew Soderquist, Lennox Dow, Thomason. May they be serene through their difficulties, and may all doubts be cleared. We pray that together we will mount the Buddha Gate platform of illuminating wisdom and quickly fulfill the path of compassionate awakening.